Are we live now?
Fiona will confirm when.
We're
No.
live now, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to this virtual meeting of the Audit Committee held today, the 1st of March 2021. My name is Councillor Peter Marriott and I'm the chairman of this committee. I'm supported this evening by the officers. There's Gail Beaton, Internal Audit Manager, Graham Clark, Strategic Director, Kimberly Sowen, Democratic Services Officer, who's clerking the meeting. Can everyone please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak? Please keep yourself on the mute when you're not speaking, and please can I also ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point. If any members in the meeting lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin the meeting, and if the webcast stream fails, then we'll also have to adjourn until we're able to reset the connection. Well, that's the usual preamble. We should have probably memorised that by now. But let's crack on with the agenda then. Item number 1 is the minutes of the last meeting. Can I ask members to confirm that they represent a correct record of that meeting? Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. I do have one issue, perhaps to bring it up at this point. The minutes contain from the last meeting the action log record, and that was an agenda item last time around, but it's not on the agenda list for this time. It would normally come after questions from members. And presumably we can't deal with that item at this meeting. Could I ask it's included in that for the next meeting?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, next item is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
No, no apologies given, but as I said to Chairman, Councillor Wicks is not in attendance at this moment.
Okay, thank you. The next item 3, disclosure of interests. Have there been any?
None disclosed prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Okay. Number 4, item 4, questions by members of the public.
None sent, Chairman.
None, okay, thank you. And item 5, question from members.
None, Chairman.
Okay. Well, let's move straight on therefore to item 6. Business to hand, the annual audit letter. Is that John for you to present or Graham?
That's for me, Chair. And I'm also joined at the meeting by my colleague Paul Kettle. Paul is actually my successor as the engagement lead for Waverley Borough Council. Members will recall that there was a potential conflict of interest that Grant Thornton had that resulted in the need for us to split the audit arrangements from our London and South East team. That conflict of interest has been removed now that the person that worked for Grant Thornton no longer works for Grant Thornton, so there is no longer a conflict. So we can transfer the audit back to the appropriate team, and Paul is an engagement leader within that team and is picking up the audit. We've already met with Graham and with Peter to introduce Paul. As I say, he's here to meet the committee. And will be taken over from me. Paul, maybe if you just say a couple of words to introduce yourself, and importantly, Paul will be working with more public bodies on the patch, so we'll be able to make those local connections as well.
Thanks, John. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Paul Cuttle. I'm a director working out of our London office, so I operate across London and the South, across various public sector bodies. As John mentioned, I'm also the engagement lead for 3 other Surrey districts. So as John said, I'll be able to share some of the knowledge and best practice from those as well, and establish what similar things they're impacted by. So as John said, we've already had a handover internally, and I've met with the finance team. So John's obviously here to conclude on 1920, and I'm up to speed and we're ready to go on 2021. So thank you very much. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you,
virtually, albeit.
Okay, Chair. So I'll very briefly take you through the annual audit letter. Now, back in days gone by, annual audit letters were quite important documents because they were the only public document that actually described the audit. However, with the development of audit committees and with the comprehensive reporting and discussion that goes on at audit committees, all in the public domain when it comes to the external audit, there is no longer a need actually for annual audit letters. And this document is a little bit of a throwback to the previous reporting requirements. It is the last annual audit letter that you will get because under the new Code of Audit Practice, the requirement for annual audit letters has been abolished for the reasons that I've just described. It's a superfluous document. It's potentially a useful document because it's a summary. It's a summary of the audit gone by, but there is no new content to the document. It's a shorter version of the audit findings report that I talked through in detail with this committee. So as I say, it's largely historic. It's there by way of it being a summary and a requirement of us to bring it to you, but there is nothing new in this document. Apart from one thing, and that is that we confirmed the fees position, which is set out later in the document. There was a fee variation beyond what we'd originally anticipated. That is in part related to the challenges of working through lockdown and through COVID, and we would suggest that you include that as a council on your COVID, the costs of COVID returns to government should additional funding be available. It's also reflective of some of the challenges that we encountered around the valuations work that we were doing. Now, the issue of fees, they're not determined by Grant Thornton, they're not determined by the council. They are independently determined by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, who is the contracting body and has the statutory role to consider all such fee variations. It'll consult with the council. It will challenge us on any proposals that we make, and will, depending on its views around that, need to see evidence of the work that we've done and evidence of the time that we've incurred in doing that work. So the committee can be assured that that whole process is covered independently by PSAA. I wasn't going to say any more on the document itself because it's a repetition of something the committee will have seen and worked through to a high degree of detail when we did talk through the audit findings report. But it does report unqualified value for money conclusion and unqualified opinion on the financial statements, which is a positive message to leave the committee with.
Thank you, John. Do any members have any questions of John or Paul?
Yeah.
John, please.
Hello there. Hello, Paul. Very nice to see you. Just a quick question. Does it mean then, if you're not having to go through all this faff of doing the annual audit letter, that our fees get reduced at some point?
Unfortunately, it's been replaced by another audit report, but a more relevant audit report. So the auditor's annual report, which will succeed the annual audit letter, won't repeat information in the way that this document did, but will be a more thorough narrative report on the value for money arrangements that the council has in place. So I'm sure Paul will talk you through those new reporting requirements when he starts to engage with the committee on the audit plans for next year.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. So I've got some points that arise from the content of the letter. No problems at all. The letter's fine, and I accept that it's largely redundant in terms of telling us anything new. But this is our last meeting of the committee for the year, and we're in troubled times. So I guess there's some questions that might be worth asking, prompted by the content of that letter. Firstly, can Grant Thornton give us an indication as to whether COVID's going to actually have any impact on the audit of this year's accounts? And then questions for our officers. Is COVID going to have any impact on our ability to close the accounts out for 2021 in a prompt manner?
I'm sure it will have impact from an audit perspective. I'm sure it will have impact. It's the working assumption that we will be still needing to work relatively remotely for several months to come. So all the planning work and the interim work that Paul's team will do potentially will be back to a normal style of engagement in the latter part of the year when the audit can take place. So that's a good sign. COVID is already being considered as an impact on the timetable. So members might recall that the reporting timetable was the 31st of July. It was extended to November last year because of COVID. Government is consulting on the accounts and audit regulations with a view to setting a realistic timetable for audit reporting. They're starting at the position of September, but even that might be unachievable, and so there could well be delays to the reporting timetable beyond that. Audit content wise, the risks come into play then, so we have to do more work around the remote transference of documents between the two teams, risk assessing the processes in place there. But also there are the underlying risks of things like how COVID will still impact on things like property valuations, how COVID will impact on the financial sustainability of the council going forward. The ongoing financial challenges have to all be considered. The way you account for provisions against debt levels, for example, around council tax, around business rates, all those sorts of things are all impacted by the risks of COVID. So yes, it'll be a feature of the audit, and I'm sure when Paul does the value for money planning for next year, how the council has responded to COVID, the arrangements you had in place during the COVID pandemic that will have largely been over the 2021 financial year will all be legitimate territory for the audit to consider in that perspective.
Thank you.
Chairman, it's Graham. Do you want me to come in? I think Councillor Seaborn asked for officer's perspective as well.
If you
Is that okay? Well, Chairman, if I can start, and then I'll hand over to Rosie, because Rosie's our financial services manager, accountancy, and Rosie runs the final accounts process. But maybe I could just start by saying, yes, it's our intention to work as closely as we can to our normal pre-COVID timescales, which are around the sort of June, July mark for finishing. And even if, as John said, the government changed the regs and allow a little bit more flexibility, we still want to try and keep that discipline there. Now, I'm very conscious that there are a few issues in last year's audit. Members will recall from the 2nd or 1st of November meeting, a number of actions that were identified in Grant Thornton's report. And maybe just take this opportunity, Chairman, just to reassure the committee that Rosie and Peter and the team already have an action plan to address those and have already put measures in place to address those issues. A lot of them are around assets. Some were to do with sort of ramped up audit and evidence requirements, and some were just to do with, we were transitioning between team structures between finance and property, and a lot of that's settled down now. So as we come into this audit, I'm much more confident, comfortable that we will have all of those items addressed. And as John said, Peter and I did meet with John and Paul last week, and we'll be meeting with Paul and his team very soon to start running through some of those to make sure that they are robust going into this audit. Rosie, is there anything you want to add? Are we online for a relatively early close down, back to normal almost?
Yeah, so I can add to Graham there and just saying, yeah, we do have a timetable in place that is aiming for a kind of end of June into July completion, which isn't far away from where we normally would be. I mean, this year we obviously know the situation around the pandemic a little more, so we've been able to plan for that and put some procedures in place. But so far we're on target to hit kind of end of June, mid-July deadlines. So.
That's good. Happy, Richard?
Very happy. No, thank you very much. Both Grant Thornton and the officers were very helpful responses, and no surprises, and it'll alert the committee to the fact that we may get some surprises in terms of the detail of the timing, but it's not a surprise if you know it's coming. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going back to the last point, if you could ask for those action plans to be summarised at our next meeting, I think it would be very useful for us to be informed as a result of the comments made in this audit, what actions are being taken. My second question was, in next year's audit, are there any additional requirements out of payments we've made on behalf of government? Is the government going to ask our audit to include payments of the loans we've handled or anything else that basically we've done on their behalf this year? And my last question was on the question of the certification of housing benefits. And I believe that's not completed. When will it be completed, and what issues are going to come out of that?
Okay, I can answer certainly the two questions. One on the audit requirements on how you've dispersed COVID support grants and things like that. There aren't any for the external auditor. We're more interested that the council accounts for and recognises the income in the appropriate way at the sort of the macro level, but not a detailed requirement for us to look at the arrangements for dispersing the grant. That would be probably more an internal audit side of things. And the last question, sorry, Councillor, could you remind me of it? The dog barked just at the crucial point.
The last point was the housing benefits.
Oh right, yes. Sorry, I do apologize. Yes, shortly. That works now. Well established. We've got the queries well progressed, and it should conclude shortly. I don't believe there are any matters that that members would need to know at this stage of concerns.
Chairman, can I just offer a couple of comments on the grants, and then Peter will perhaps just give an update on the benefits, if that's okay. So on the grants, since last April, we've paid out I think it's some sort of £24 million of business grants. We're still paying them out now. As members will know, we're using Reigate and Banstead's revenues team to administer that this time round. But nevertheless, we are still responsible and accountable for the payments. In fact, we're making the payments as well. They're just processing the applications and giving us a payment run, and we're paying the money out. So Gail very helpfully did some work for us in the beginning part of that process to ensure that we've got controls in place, and the government comes straight to us rather than via Grant Thornton for our post-payment assurance work. So we have to satisfy them that our arrangements are in place, and they, at the end of each grant scheme, they check in with us on what we've been doing and how we've taken steps to ensure that fraud and error have been kept to a minimum, because there have been fraud up and down the country. And I think particularly last April and May, where the government sort of suddenly launched the scheme, threw loads of money into our bank accounts and said, get the grant out as quickly as possible. I think whereas we were slightly slower getting off the mark because we wanted to get the controls in place, and Peter and his team wanted to make those upfront controls, and we're really pleased that we did, because when we submitted our post-payment reassurance submissions for the first batch in about November time, we felt very comfortable in doing so. Peter, on the benefit side, anything to update on Councillor Gray's question from our perspective?
I'll just mirror John's comment that it's progressed well. It's not far to go. It's been resourced adequately internally, so we haven't got particular challenges to get to the end of this. In terms of impact at the end, it's a very different audit to a final accounts audit. This is a prescriptive audit from DWP. They are looking at every pound and pence. So the smallest error, even a 1p error, gets extrapolated over a population. Either way, so whether it's under or over, that all gets accumulated at the end into a sum of money. And then an adjustment will be made to subsidy, but we won't necessarily know the detail of that until the audit work, the field work itself is actually completed.
If I could come back and say, when will that audit work be completed on the housing benefits?
So we're now into March, so it's literally within the next couple of weeks we'll be finished.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that complete answer. Thank you. Very good.
Gail, you have your hand raised. Gail, you have your hand raised.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, I just wanted to add, yes, we also have within it, going on from John's point, John Roberts from Grant Thornton, just to say that we do actually have some time in the audit plan to look at post-payment checks on COVID grants to give more assurance to government as to how we have administered our grants and how accurate they were.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Floyd Douglas.
Thank you. Just a quick point. I was going to pick it up later when we get to the internal audit plan, but it seems to have come up now. I noticed under the financial management stuff that we had in that, there's nothing about in the fraud section about potential frauds and how we're doing that. So I don't know if now's the time to talk about that, bearing in mind what Graham's been saying, or whether just to hold on to that question for a bit later.
Graham, do you want to do that now or leave it till the next, to the agenda item?
Yeah, I think it might fit better under Gail's audit plan, actually, if that's okay, Councillor.
Yeah,
no problem at all. And if I forget to mention it, please remind me.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions of John?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Hyman had registered to speak on this item.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much. In terms of value for money conclusion, on the bits of paper in page 11, it says value for money conclusion. My comments really go to, or questions really go to justification and in terms of value for money and accuracy. In the first place, it says at the end of the first paragraph on page 11 that the council has not used the furlough scheme, but has incurred overtime costs. Residents might be, who are looking at the council tax rise or whatever, might think to themselves, well, you know, how on earth do the council justify using overtime, paying overtime if we're not now? But I know a part of the answer to this, and there is justification, but I think it's important that we have that for residents. How have we, or has anybody, in terms of Grant Thornton or ourselves, assessed the approach, the impact in terms of value for money of the approach of not using the furlough scheme? Because of course, our council taxpayers are paying for our staff receiving full salary throughout the COVID period, where 80% could have been paid by of some of the staff. Residents might think that 80% could have been paid by the government, so it would come from the Treasury rather than through their own council taxes. And so I wonder, you know, is there an assessment of that approach? What sort of assessment has been made in terms of value for money for our residents? how can the impact on council tax be justified to residents, I suppose is that question. And at the start of the second paragraph, it says on that page 11, it says the council stopped all recruitment and non-essential spending for 2020. So that's not actually true. We didn't stop all recruitment. I've pointed out a number of times. If we were to change the words around so that it said all non-essential recruitment and spending, then I wouldn't be able to argue with it. But I do think it's important that if something's coming out of the auditors, then it is true. So if you just confirm that, that's my own point of view, but we've been told that not all recruitment has been suspended, and therefore, when it's our officers saying that, this is contradicting what they've told us. And on page 12, in respect of the commercial property portfolio, Chairman, where it says that the PIAB the investment board ensures due diligence. I've got a little difficulty with where it says each property will have an exit strategy to ensure that the council can act in fact, to prevent further loss should the objectives of return not be achieved. And I'm not entirely sure, I don't see that in what we've been doing as a council, that we have got a proper exit strategy that fully ensures that we abide by the primary responsibility that we have through the statutory guidance in law to protect the capital. So, I do want to ask, has the risk of using cash flow and the risk to capital been considered by audit, and is it considered by Grant Thornton, our auditors? So I suppose those questions are to both the auditors and to our officers and to us ourselves in respect of value for money, how the council tax can be justified to residents in the COVID expenditure that we've incurred, where we had a choice in a way. The issue of stopping all recruitment, and then the question of the risk of using cash flow, has it been considered, and do we really have a fully functioning exit strategy for every investment? I thank you very much for your time, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Graham, would you like to respond to some of that?
Yes, indeed, Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, and I think most of that probably sits with me and Peter rather than with John. But I mean, of course, John, if you want to come in on the audit point, but maybe I can start with furlough. So the government, in announcing its furlough scheme last year, did strongly discourage public sector organisations from using it on the basis that they would be extremely busy and probably wouldn't have the opportunity. Now, that was the reality. There were very few of our services that experienced lower than normal as a result of COVID demand, and I'll touch on that in a sec. Most actually experienced a higher demand. So let's take the Borough Hall, for example, in the Berries. Clearly, there was a legal requirement under the COVID rules for that to close, and we had 2 staff there that we redeployed. And so any of our functions, which were very few, that had either been stopped by government regs or had lower demand as a result of COVID, actually we quickly snapped up those staff and redeployed them, mainly to 2 areas actually last April and May. Firstly, processing business grants, and secondly to supporting the phone calls to the clinically vulnerable in the borough. Now, the government gave us admin grants for those, and that's what paid the overtime. So it was a very cost-effective way of us resourcing those 2 functions. In a crisis where we could use our existing staff that we knew and trusted, and we could quickly train them in those new areas. And they were those overtime costs were mainly around the Easter weekend 2020, fully funded from government grants. So. No direct impact on our own council taxpayers, and there just simply wasn't the opportunity for us to use furlough in last year. And we did take that decision consciously by the management board and our COVID strategic group, and then that was back in April last year, and then we revisited that periodically as the position changed. But what we did find was that the demand on the service was such that it just wasn't doable anyway. Just on the point about recruitment, I agree with you, Councillor Hyman. Actually, I think yes, moving the non-essential to before recruitment would be more accurate of the decision that we took corporately, which was to have recruitment constraints rather than recruitment freeze, because we did recruit into posts over the course of the year. But it was we introduced a quite stringent process for heads of service to come to management boards, justify the necessity of it. We balanced that against the need to save money mid-year, and we did make some recruitment, but we also pulled back on about £500,000 or £600,000 of staff spend in order to balance the budget. So, but you are right, we did make some recruitment. I might just hand over to Peter now on the exit strategy and funding from cash point on the property, and then maybe, I don't know, John, if you wanted to come in at the end, if that's okay, Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. So just a couple of items there. One is the exit strategy on investment properties. So we do actively manage our investment portfolio now. We have an asset investment manager in place. We have now for nearly 2 years. And our investment properties are under constant review. And the reason they're always under constant review is because we're looking for opportunity to maximize those assets. We don't buy assets and passively sit on them, just raking money in off them. It just, that world doesn't exist. And where we have particularly difficult assets to deal with within the portfolio, we are actively on a literally daily basis negotiating the use of those assets going forward. So it's not as simple as just saying we have an exit strategy. We constantly work on the assets that we have to make sure we're maintaining value, particularly those that still have long leases on assets that say 4 or 5 years out. We're very interested in what we're going to do with those assets long before those leases come up for any form of discussion, and because that's where the most value added is gained in understanding what we can do with those assets. The very latest acquisition actually takes us into the discussion of cash flow. But the latest acquisition, we went into that acquisition with an exit strategy. We understood what the options were before we bought that asset, and how we were going to make sure we did the best we could to maintain the capital value. In terms of funding of the assets, where we've used internal funding, that's part of our treasury management strategy. It's part of our long-term cash flow. We assess that against the ability to invest on the open market in terms of fixed-term, fixed-rate deposits. So we have a very strong benchmark in terms of the returns we're looking for. And we also understand in significant detail our operational cash flow over a long period of time. So that is beyond the medium-term financial plan. We tend to look 10 years out to understand our position. So where we have used internal cash, it's because it's the most prudent thing to do to maximize the value of the overall investment. So we can no longer look at an investment entirely as an investment. We have to look at investments in terms of how we also finance them, because part of the value added, the value gain in any investment is how we finance that asset. It has a big role to play in the overall value that it generates. Hopefully that's a fairly straightforward answer.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I can just build on some of those answers then. On the financial sustainability point, one of the things to remember is our responsibility is the audit is a backward-looking audit. Our responsibility is to consider the adequacy of the arrangements the council had in place for the financial year that ended 31st of March. So whilst we comment on COVID in terms of the context and the implications that COVID had for those arrangements, the arrangements in place at March actually were sort of COVID was only just starting to become an issue at that point. So the bulk of how the council's arrangements responded to COVID would be picked up in the 2021 audit year, which will be subject to next year's plan. The point around then the commercial property portfolio is, I think, that our responsibility as your auditors is to consider the adequacy of your arrangements that are actually in place, not to consider how those play off against alternative arrangements. If we felt that the existing arrangements were adequate, then that's as far as we can take it as your external auditors, and that's what we've done in this case when we've talked about the exit strategies and so on.
Councillor Hyman, you'd like to come back on those comments?
I could at length, but no, I won't. I'll allow if the committee members would like to take up any of the issues, of course, I'm happy for them to do so. But yes, I mean, I had understood some of that in advance. I wanted members to understand too, and I think that particularly is also, I think it's important to realise the limitations of the audit function for the external auditors and what their role is there. And I think that's been summarised very, very well. And I thank our officers and John for doing so. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jerry. I have one, I suppose it's a question on this item, which I was going to raise under the governance. And it is to do with the investment strategy. I think it would be useful to me, maybe other members of the committee, to understand from Grant Thornton where other councils have fallen down on their investment strategy. You know, we read a lot about Spelthorne and Croydon and so on. Is there something that we can learn or read across on those activities, which we obviously will avoid, but it would be good to see where the particular issues arose from those other councils? Is that something which would be valuable?
I would absolutely say so, and there is, you know, it's been an emerging area of audit attention over the last few years. There's also a very useful National Audit Office report on the subject, which we've contributed to. In terms of the timing of this meeting, it would be perhaps wouldn't do it justice to just give you a very quick snapshot answer. So I might volunteer Paul to come back to the committee with more detail next time, if that's okay with you, Chair. It's, you know, the issues tend to relate to councils being in a whole new area of activity that they've never been in before, re-spraying officers into new functions that they have had little experience and knowledge of before. Maybe not using advisors in the way that they've needed to around appropriate due diligence and so on, straying beyond the powers around the geographical areas and getting into areas of risk and not being sort of fully sighted on what those areas of risk were, given the fact that obviously in an upturn world, it's great, you make money, but the consequence in a downturn is that you could take a considerable loss, and so there's a whole story around this. I think the NAO report is actually a very good place to start.
Graham and Peter, would you support such a session?
Chairman, it's quite timely actually, because you'll remember last Tuesday when approving the budget, one of the things we asked council to do was to maintain the validity of our existing capital strategy, which includes our property investment strategy, for up to another year in the light of the consultation from government and SIPFA on investments, and indeed the change to the Public Works Loan Board borrowing. So I think it would be very timely for this committee to consider the governance aspects as we go through this coming sort of 6 months or so. And alongside that, the Value for Money ONS will be looking at the policy making side ahead of executive and council. I think we said that we would bring that back no later than next February. and it very much depends on the speed that the government can turn the consultation response out into new regulations and statutory guidance. And then we'll bring that back into members. So I think, yeah, a view on the governance aspect would be good, because, my own view is some of these councils that have got into property in a big way, potentially had delegations to officers and to councillors, way beyond what Waverley's got. Waverley's delegations were extremely low. And so consequently, I think Spelthorne, went public and said that they reviewed their delegations afterwards and brought them right back down so that there's greater transparency. And so, the whole governance side of it is really important, and that is the business of this committee. So yes, it fits in nicely, actually. So over the course of maybe the next couple of meetings, we can, bring that subject into the committee, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware that the audit committees on those councils took a lot of stick for their lack of over those aspects. So this is a sort of lessons learned, I suppose, things we can learn from those activities. Are you happy with that, Jerome, so that we can take this on in some future meeting? Muted.
Sorry, was that me? Did you?
Jerome, yeah.
Oh.
Can't hear you, Jerome. No. Still can't hear. No, we'll have to come back to that. Okay, can I leave that, Graham, Kimberly, with you to schedule that in at some point over the next few meetings? Yeah. Councillor
Floyd.
Yeah, Councillor Floyd.
Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose for me, I'd be very interested to hear a lot about that, John. Thank you. In particular, where it comes to material misstatement, were there any lessons learned from that as well? And also, I noticed that on page 7 of the report, about this emphasis of matter paragraph and sort of where that fits in as well. So those two areas would be of particular interest to me if we could cover those. Thank you.
Okay. And I can do the emphasis matter on very quickly, and that was a particular consequence of COVID, was that the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors issued guidance to all of its members, the valuers, to reflect the fact that at last March, it felt that the majority of property valuations would include material uncertainty. So the council then discloses that on its valuers' advice, and because it's a material uncertainty, our audit highlights that. We emphasize it. We bring it out in our audit report, but that's not a qualification. It's just us emphasizing something that the council has set out as important.
Fine, thank you. And therefore, also obviously the experts, that must impact the experts again, that they use or choose to use or not use. Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Jerome, see if it works now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that sounds good.
Technical hitch. Yes, I very much think it'd be a good idea if we could do just that and have Paul share the views from Grant Thornton, and at the same time possibly allow us to relook at the governance document for property investment to ensure that we are comfortable with it as a committee, and whether Grant Thornton have any thoughts about whether we could improve on it, mindful of their experience with other councils.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No. Well, can I thank John, Paul as well for presenting that item, and just say we've received the annual audit letter. Okay, moving on to item 7, which is the annual government statement. Can I just ask, Kimberly, we saw this statement in the September agenda pack. Is this exactly the same apart from the signatures?
Yes, I believe so.
So we don't need to discuss this because we discussed it then.
No, Chair. It's more a case of us bringing up any potential governance issues that the committee wish to raise.
Okay.
Chairman, can I? It's Peter Vickers. So the bit that we've got missing there is the cover report explaining why it's there, which apologies, seems to have gone awry. It was produced. So the point of having this on here is the start of the formal review of the annual governance statement for the past financial year. So it's for that purpose, and also to have a discussion generally around potential governance matters over the last 12 months or so that we will need to reflect in that statement. So at every audit meeting, we do have an agenda item that covers off governance matters. So the committee has the opportunity to have a conversation about any concerns and work through those. And the culmination of all of those individual conversations is the annual governance statement. So this is the point of it being there is we've literally just put it there as a reminder. This is what it is, and it's the opportunity for the committee to give a steer on where they feel they want to see it going in terms of it being redrafted now for the last financial year 2021. So it's just the beginning of a journey. So there is the opportunity to do some of this offline with the committee, so we can develop it between now and June, July time when we have to formalise it, complete it. So it's just really the beginning of the journey for this document.
Okay. Is this something we could combine with our review of the property investment problems at other councils? Is that a separate meeting, do you think, or could we do it all in one session?
It feels like a separate meeting to me, because they're both quite solid items in themselves, and they're different focuses, really. The property is very specific to the property, where the annual governance statement looks at the whole governance arrangement of the council. So there's an update in that we will reflect in the redraft, which Patrick's leading on for us, and Patrick's at the meeting here tonight, where we will be bringing in the latest SIPFA guidance around the governance statement. It's the opportunity for the committee to look at the format and the layout and make sure you're comfortable with that now. It's been in existence for 3 years or so, maybe 4 years now, in the current format. Councillor Seaborn will recognise it from and Councillor Gray from their continuation on the audit committee to getting it into the current format that it's in. It hasn't evolved beyond that. It's done its job very well so far. But this committee may choose to want to do something slightly differently with it. I'm not suggesting anything in particular, but if something you feel would work better as a layout, then we're open to having those conversations and working with you to achieve that. Okay. So I'm not expecting the answers tonight, Chairman, but it's the general discussion, and then maybe we can commit to coming together in an informal seminar at some point to have an in-depth look at this document.
Okay. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just sort of adding to what Peter's just said. It was brought in as an item every meeting, so that it just reminds us to bring forward items that we may want to include in the annual governance review, and to keep track of those. I mean, from my point of view, I would raise here tonight that I'd be looking for something to be put in there about COVID and how COVID was coped with and the issues around that. The impact of COVID onto our financial, our budgets, our emergency budgets, what we've done to our reserves, and potentially coming forward is our property investment and the risks and opportunities on property investment as a result of potential changes to the Public Works Loan Board, and a change perhaps in government's appetite. But I do think we need to include those three things in our next annual governance report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. So I guess if members agree, then is that something we should now be looking to set up as an offline meeting to go through those issues?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, Kimberly, could you sort out that in the agenda, in the timetable things? Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, if I may, I have indicated on this item too.
Say again, sorry, Councillor Hyman.
If I may, I have indicated on this item too, as well. I mean,
Okay.
rather than 2 because it's item 8. Thank you. 7 actually, isn't it? Is or something. Yes, this is. I have to disagree to some extent with what Peter Vickers has said, where he says it's the beginning of a journey for this document, because I rather think it's actually more of an end of the journey for this document. This arrived last March, 1 year ago, in this meeting 1 year ago. This document was in front of us in pretty much this form exactly. And it did come back in September time and was on the agenda a few times there. I had expected to see one for this year, i.e. the one a year on, because a year ago this one was here. So I'm slightly surprised that this was back with us, but I don't miss an opportunity, as you know, to raise some issues which are appropriate. On page 1 of the report there, it says, what is corporate governance? And I think it's absolutely essential, really. We should force feed that part down the throats of every single member that we've got. On page 2, there's a lovely, pretty pentagon with a green bit in the middle, which is actually very useful, much more useful than most such things. And the then approximate 1 page of the 7 principles there, the summary, that need, I think, every member, I think, should be reading those every night before they go to bed for 3 weeks when they first become a councillor. And I'd very much appreciate it if the audit committee make sure they do, if they haven't already force-fed themselves the 21 times necessary for it to be put into their grey matter. The minutes from 1 year ago, I won't go through exactly what I said back then because they are in the minutes from a year ago, but I did specifically refer to, that's great, my other computer switched itself off because I didn't pay attention to it. On page 6 of this report, I referred to the air quality and the habitats regulations issues, to the major issues that we have in terms of legal obligations. As the minutes say, the chairman, Councillor Marriott, commented on the planning presentations that we'd had, and that it was agreed that applicants were obliged to provide assessment reports, but it wasn't happening, and it was suggested that a tick box approach could be taken to ensure all consultations and assessments have been completed, and it had been raised with the head of planning. And most of the committee agreed with Councillor Marriott's comments. But a year on, we haven't actually seen any improvement in the processes there to ensure that, which obviously the audit committee wanted to see, in order to ensure that we are compliant with the legal constraints, which are the most important things that we have. So I'm a little bit disappointed that a year on we don't have that. If we could have perhaps some comments on what's being done about that, I'd appreciate it, Chairman. Let me just think whether there was anything else. Yes, so the matters that I raised that are in the minutes of last year's, a year ago's meeting, haven't been addressed, and that obviously has to be of concern to me. I don't think it's something which is necessarily for John and for Paul to get involved into, other than writing appropriate words. It's for us to provide them with those appropriate words, but it would be nice to see the next version of this as it comes forwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Yes, so I have your concerns, and in fact, one of the reasons, going back last year sometime, I was keen on maintaining the action log, because that was one of the items that should have been on there. I did raise this with Graham Clark a few weeks ago, and Graham had taken it on to talk to Zach about implementing these things. So, Graham, could you tell us what the latest situation is?
Chairman, you actually raised it quite a bit longer ago than that with me, actually, and I did speak to Zach, and Zach said that he was confident that our reports did cover the required areas. and was asking for specifics. Now, he also said he would contact you and meet with you, and I apologise if that hasn't happened, Chairman, because I'm guessing it hasn't, because it still appears to be an unresolved matter. I'll make sure Zach contacts you this week, and in a phone call, and just sort of bottoms that out, Chairman. But it was a while ago that you mentioned it to me, and I apologise if it hasn't been resolved yet. I did speak to the head of planning, who felt confident that we were meeting the requirements, but he was going to be contacting you. That clearly hasn't happened, so I'll make sure that happens this week.
Okay, thank you, Graham. I mean, I think, I guess, well, not speaking for Councillor Hyman, but I think we are both in the same position that what we are looking for are the assessment reports. They are physical documents that have to be tabled at the planning application meetings, and those don't exist as far as I know. When I speak to people on planning committees, they never say they've seen these reports. It may well be that people have said it's okay, or Natural England have said it's okay, whatever, but the physical document has to be provided in some form. A referenceable document, as far as I understand the law, is as advised to us by the QC who came just over a year ago to tell us about these issues. So that's where I'm standing. That's, I think, a legal requirement that is not being met at the moment.
Okay. Yep. Okay. As I said, I did raise it with Zach, but let me put that to him again, and I'll ask him to contact you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Where are we on this one then? We're going to arrange an offline meeting then, I guess, and go through these issues. Is that item 7 completed? Are we all happy with that? Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 8, the accounting policies.
Okay, Chairman, thank you. I'll start, and then Rosie can add if she wishes to. So the accounting policies are the basis of the underlying assumptions and interpretations that we put into developing the financial statements. So if you notice, it's quite a long document. There's a lot of individual items within those policies, because they govern many areas of how we interpret the performance of the organisation from all different angles, whether it's assets or income generation, treatment of VAT, there's salaries, employment, there's all kinds of assumptions and assessments we have to make. And that's what these policies do. They set out the basis of how we do all of that work to bring together a set of numbers in a financial and notes in a set of financial statements. So it's important that the committee has the opportunity to review those and understand the context of those policies to make sure that they are reflective of this organisation in terms of the statements that we're about to do. But also, it's also important to make sure they're reflective of the last 12 months, because that's what the statements are what we're producing. There has to be an element of consistency from year to year. So what we tend to look for is where something's changed in the business, what's changed in the world around us that we need to think about in terms of these policies. Are these policies adequate enough to reflect the changes in the environment within which we deliver service and our funding, etc., our asset values, or do we need to consider having an adjustment to that, any of those policies? So we've touched on quite a few things tonight that really also touch on accounting policies. A lot of the conversation around COVID plays into this, because it plays in a very strong way into our asset valuations, the assumptions that go into those valuations. It plays into the grant recognition conversation that we've had around government grants and the accounting you have to do for that. A lot of that is third-party agency relationship that we have with the government. The money doesn't necessarily come directly to us, all those millions of pounds. we happen to be administrators, but we still account for that in these statements, and we have assumptions around that we have within the policies. So that's really what they're about. Maybe Rosie would like to add anything to that ramble, I suppose.
Thank you. I don't have a great deal to add. I think the one thing for me to raise is when we had this conversation last year, we were looking at quite a large change in the standards around IFRS 16, which is the leases standard. I think just to make it clear, I know it's in the report, that standard has been delayed now and transition date is now April 22. So we haven't made any changes to the policies as we were expecting to this time last year. And actually there's not been a great deal of standard changes that will majorly impact our accounts or the accounting policies for this financial year. Despite the changes going on in the wider world, accounting standards have been kept the same pretty much this financial year.
Will the Redmond recommendations have an impact on this if they are adopted?
Good question. At the moment, it depends what will be adopted and when. We're not expecting anything to come in for this financial year, and I haven't heard anything coming in for definite for next financial year. I wouldn't expect it to necessarily impact our policies, depending on what the government make the changes for. I think it will be more around the structure of how audit is delivered.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one point really. We've had quite a few comments from the auditors about our valuation processes. Are we happy in the light of the issues that we've had and their recommendation that we change the way we review various things? Do we have to put that in to our accounting policies? Do we have to make changes to reflect that? That's my question there.
Chairman, I'll take that one. So the auditors haven't questioned our accounting policies that are in the statements themselves. The majority of the audit comment came from the physical valuations themselves and the differences in things like indices that were being used. There's been no question of the adequacy of the policies themselves. So as they stand, they absolutely serve the purpose for us. It's more about our processes, internal processes that we've been using, and a few technical valuation issues. But whatever we've done has been in line with our policy, our valuation policies.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Gray, does that answer your question?
Sort of. To me, they are changes to the process. I think we've got to look very carefully at those accounting policies and make sure they do actually reflect it. To me, if you've got a process weakness that's come out, which and actually a process change that's been suggested by the auditors, it may be something that needs to be looked at, just to say that we don't have anything we need to change. I wouldn't like to see it brushed off and just say, "Oh well, we're okay, so we won't do anything."
Okay,
Chairman, just responding to that. So apologies, Councillor Gray. I mean, it wasn't a brush off. It was more of a factual statement that there isn't a requirement as such to adjust our accounting policies based on the last audit. If there were, we would be bringing into this committee and highlighting them that there's an adjustment required. If we weren't doing that, the auditors would be doing it for us. So wherever there's an inadequacy in one of the policies that doesn't truly represent what should be in our final accounts and the way we approach valuations. So there is a distinction between process and accounting policies. They are quite different things. The accounting policy isn't descriptive of how to do something like a valuation. It's more about the kind of assumptions that go into it in line with accepted international accounting standard.
My apologies
that
for
helps.
using the words brush off. I do withdraw that comment.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments on this item? Okay, there is a recommendation. It's recommended that the Audit Committee reviews and considers the adequacy of the accounting policies that underpin the preparation of the financial statements, and notes that there are no proposed changes in accounting policy or changes in accounting standards to apply in the 2020-2021 financial statements. Are we happy with that?
Agreed, Jim.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 9, the proposed internal audit plan for 2021-22, page 51-64 of the agenda pack. Who's taking this one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gail Beaton, Internal Audit Manager. I'll take that one. Thank you.
Gail. Thank you, Gail.
Yes, agenda item 9 gives the proposed internal audit plan for 2021-22. The audit plan has been compiled in the usual manner by consultation with heads of service and senior management. Myself completing my risk assessment of our audit universe, and presented tonight is the outcomes of that assessment and consultation. And included in the proposed plan for next year are also those reviews that were deferred from this financial year. And you will be able to see those reviews, which are included in item number 10, regarding the current plan that we're working to. If I can just highlight those reviews that have been added in, include the, sorry, gone down my page. Yes, those reviews that are included in page 61 includes an IT risk assessment that will be included for looking at the current environment. As we know, due to remote working, there has been enhancements made to our IT environment. So there'll be an IT risk assessment carried out on that environment, and the outcome of that will dictate the reviews that we will be carrying out relating to IT in the coming year. So therefore, those have not yet been defined, and the resources will be made available to complete those reviews in 21-22. At the previous audit committee, we also talked about the Horizon system, which is the planning system. And you will see there is a proposal to do a post-implementation review of the Horizon planning system. And we earlier in one of the previous papers, we talked about the business grants and how we had dispersed those grants. So again, there's going to be some post-payment business compliance grants so that we can provide assurance to management, to members, but also to the government as to how we administered those grants.
Sorry, Gail, can I come back to the IT systems?
Yes.
Not just Horizon, but in general. When you introduce new software upgrades, for example, do you run the new system and the old system side by side until you're happy that the new system is actually working? It seems you've had problems with Horizon in particular. Do you just jump into the new system and you expect it to work, or at least prepared for things to happen that you can put right?
Well, with the Horizon system, this was a new system that's been developed in conjunction with the supplier. And we have in actual fact been doing, that's one of the reasons the system has been delayed, because they've been doing extra testing and training of staff, which has in actual fact meant that the implementation of the system has been delayed. But your question regarding run in parallel, that is something I myself haven't been involved in, which I'm not sure, maybe Graham could add something to that as to whether he's aware of the content of the project plan as to whether that has been completed. But in general, when we are buying a new system, there is generally a parallel running of systems to ensure one is running before we press the closure button of the old system.
Okay.
Another item maybe members might be interested in is within the corporate system, there's plan to carry out a review of the property terrier, which can affect the outcomes regarding the valuations of properties if the property terrier is not kept up to date as to the stock condition of that property, of those properties on that terrier. And I feel that's important to give management assurance that that is accurate as it can be and is kept up to date as well. And I'm not sure whether any other members have any other questions they want to ask on. One other thing, sorry, can I just, before we move on? Also in page 64, Councillor Jan Floyd Douglas asked a question regarding fraud and COVID grants. As you can see there, in the fraud and irregularities, we do have an exercise that we're going to be taking part on the NFI regarding a nationwide data matching exercise regarding COVID grants. And we've also been involved with the National Fraud Initiative, as the COVID grants have been administered. Any issues that have been identified by other authorities have been shared with other local authorities to enable us to highlight any issues that have occurred to other authorities.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gail. Councillor Floyd Douglas.
Hello, I'll just get rid of this reaction a minute. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Gail. I see where it is now. The other thing, just looking at it, bearing in mind we've had COVID for the last year, we know the impact is on our staff. I get well-meaning, well-being emails probably every other week about, do you want to talk to someone? Don't forget, there's nothing in here about the impact of COVID on mental health of our staff, on councillors, on officers or whatever within the council. And I'm surprised at that, because the mental health issue seems to be gaining massive momentum in terms of people actually sort of outing themselves about having that, but also about the fact that, you know, when you look at lone working, I see it as another way, a lone working, people on their own, isolated. And I'm surprised that from a reputational or pastoral care perspective that we're not actually looking into that for next year. It might be somewhere else, but it seems to be quite an omission for me. Any thoughts would be helpful.
Chairman.
Sorry.
So, do you want to respond to that?
Well, Chairman, maybe I could just reassure councillors that that actually, rather than through the audit plan, we meet every week as a COVID strategic group, and that's a cross section of officers, and our HR manager attends that meeting. That's been going on now since the end of last March. That meeting, we've met every week, and we've reviewed a whole range of things, including one of our core agenda items. And actually, Kimberly has been to every one of those meetings, haven't you, Kimberly? So can vouch for this. And that's right at the heart of that is looking after our staff. And our HR manager attends every meeting and puts out comms every week. You know, I mean, I'm not suggesting we've done everything perfectly, but we have checked in with our staff, and we've had really good feedback that the communications that our HR managers put out have been really helpful and supportive. And it's Sally Kipping is our HR manager, and she holds every month for the last year. She's held sort of manager drop-in sessions. It's called sort of Time to Think, and they all come along and talk about where, you know, how things are going. And actually, we've picked up the staff welfare and mental health piece through that group rather than through the audit plan. I'll come back to Gail in a sec, so that Gail can sort of add to anything there. But that is where we've tried to keep tabs on it, because you're absolutely right. We've got some officers who just physically haven't been in the office for 11 months now. And they really miss that social interaction, that bouncing things off of people. And we all do. I mean, I'm going in one day a week on the sort of senior management rota. And I happily go in 5 days a week, because it's really nice to go back in and meet people. And Peter's going in a day a week. And it makes such a big difference. But we're all, you know, respecting government guidance and our local guidance. And unless we have to go in, we are still advising people to stay at home, but hopefully it's a matter of months away that we can, take a different view and get those teams meeting again, albeit maybe with some sort of restrictions in a safe working environment. So Gail, did you have anything else to add from an audit perspective? Because that's, hopefully that picks up your comment there, Councillor Floyd Douglas, about staff welfare. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, have you sort of told the council about this sort of weekly thing? Because if you have, I've missed it. And I think it's really helpful to know that the staff are being looked after in that way, because I have residents phone me up with mental health issues, I'd say every other week. And rather the output of that is around debt and things like that, business issues and whatever. But you just think, well, I wonder if the staff are actually being looked after. So it's very helpful. And thank you for that, to know that they are.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I won't go into too much detail, Jen, but of course, the other point that sort of not compounds it, but I mean, we're going through huge change at the moment. We've got, as you know, from the budget last week, our financial pressures are meaning that we're going through a lot of change programs as well, and we're looking at our costs, we're looking at efficiency, as we have been for a few years. But we're asking our staff. We're not doing whole-scale redundancy programs, but there is uncertainty around, because we are looking at so many different aspects of our business to try and make them more efficient and take some cost out to balance our books. And so that, on top of people communicating with their colleagues mainly remotely, is just a sort of a tricky mix. But it's the same for most organisations. We're not alone, but clearly our concern is our workforce here, and that is we're doing what we can, and so far I think we're okay. But it's been a long time.
It has. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
There was one thing I was going to say is, although these are reviews that are in the plan, there are other resources available that can be deployed throughout the year, because I've had to leave the plan flexible, because obviously at the moment we don't know how the year is going to be progressing into the next financial year. But taking Councillor Floyd Douglas's point, it's something I'll keep an eye on, and maybe I'll make a decision halfway through the year as to whether I feel it'd be beneficial to do a review in the area of well-being.
Thank you. That sounds good, Gail. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Gail, for the document, nice and clear as usual. Let's just start with a point of less substance. On page 5 of the plan, there's a summary of the council's corporate strategy. As far as I can see, the wording's the same as last year, but we did actually approve a new strategy in December. The general gist of which is not radically different from what you've got listed there, but there's maybe just a little bit more emphasis on climate change that ought to appear. So maybe you take a look at that and adjust it as appropriate. On the substantive issues, there are a couple of areas where I wonder whether a little tweak of the scope might bring a little bit more benefit from the exercise. So there's one on responsive repairs, and the contract's currently up for renewal, and the housing operations team's going through a very diligent procurement process on that. So in the spirit of audit being a learning and continuous improvement tool, I wonder if just adding something into the scope to include identification of opportunities for system improvement that can be implemented with the new contractor would be good. So rather than just doing the exercise, actually doing the exercise with the purpose of making the next contract even better than the current one. One suggestion. And on the waste management item, where we're looking at whether we're correctly paying for miscollections, there do appear to have been a goodly number of miscollections over and above those directly attributable to COVID stresses. So one can accept that, but they were actually happening before. I'm getting a lot of complaints from residents about miscollections, and I don't think I'm alone. So it may be good in that particular exercise to actually compare the performance of our current contractor with the previous contractor to see whether the perception I have is actually a perception or whether it's reality. because again, residents are coming to me and saying our previous contractor is actually operating in Guildford and they're doing a better job. Is this real or is it not? Your piece of work is actually an opportunity to determine that, and then we've either got some evidence to refute the things that residents are telling us, or there's an action item to look at. So a couple of suggestions. I hope those add value, but otherwise I'm very comfortable with the things you've got in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I was hesitating whether to bring one of the points up because I think it covers some of the grounds that Councillor Floyd Douglas has covered. But a concern I had on the transformation was the extent to which Waverley is changing the processes, the way it uses staff, etc. And I wondered whether we had looked at that transformation process and made sure that staff welfare was properly taken into account, and whether there has been any issues or lessons to be learned from it. And I think some of the transformation still to come. So I don't know what other people feel, but it was certainly one thing that I would bring up. The amount of stress that people can be put under with transformation can be high. However, the COVID in some respect overlapped. And I'm aware of your HR policies, and as a member, I've been invited to a drop-in session as well with your HR, and I think it's very good that you've done that. The other point I was going to raise was SIL. I believe we put off a SIL audit some time ago because there hadn't been enough around, and I'm wondering whether this year, towards the end of this year, it would be worth putting a SIL exercise in when we've got quite a lot of SIL payments will have come in, SIL projects will have come in, and whether that's worth putting on your list. Thank you.
Chairman, can I just come in on the SIL point?
Yes, please.
Because just before this meeting, I was on a very long SIL board meeting. So it's the first meeting of the SIL board to consider bids, because the bidding round closed on the 31st of January. So yes, it would be timely very soon to do that. And we were waiting for the sort of completion of the full cycle, and that was put back. The original deadline for SIL bids was, I think, in October or November. That was put back to the end of January. So that is happening now, and the target is to get the SIL board to recommend awards to the executive at its meeting right at the end of March. So I think shortly after that, I think Gail would be able to look at the full cycle of the SIL process, actually. So that would be timely.
Can I just ask, Graham, is this going to be an annual event? Is it every, say, January 31st? So there'll be another call next year?
Yes, so the council in its governance arrangements agreed an annual bidding cycle. Now, one of the things the SIL board will be considering based on our first round of experience will be whether that's appropriate or not, whether we need to have more frequent bidding rounds. All the advice we've had from other councils that have had SIL in for some time, some have had it in for sort of 7, 8, 9 years now, is stick to an annual bidding round, and your infrastructure providers will get used to that, and that'll give them time to prepare their bids, and it will give us time to accumulate enough money to make it worthwhile. So probably the advice from officers would be to stick with an annual bidding cycle, but you know, we've got more bids than well, we got demand that exceeds the available money. So that all of that will flow through soon. But from an audit perspective, I think, you know, Gail would be looking at a full cycle from governance arrangements through to bid assessment and executive approval in a couple of months' time. That should all be wrapped up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis, on
more of a point of information, Graham, with the SIL process, do we have, is it open in that all the bids for SIL money are made public, or at least made public to the councillors? And what control or process is there to approve the executive's decision? Or is it just straightforward, the executive make the decision and that's it?
Yeah, so full council agreed the governance arrangements, which we're following, which is still advisory board, look at all bids on an annual cycle, and then prepare a report to the executive, which will be an open report, and that will have the unsuccessfuls and the successfuls in. Then the executive consider that in an open meeting, and then that's it, because they're operating under a delegation. Now, as with all executive decisions, there is a call in for ONS, but they would have to, meet the ONS requirements. So yes, so all of that is as per agreed. It's a cross-party still advisory board, and then it's on to the exec. But that's what the council's currently agreed as its governance arrangement, and I'm sure it will want to do a review, even if it concludes that was appropriate and satisfactory as a way of managing those bids. Is that okay?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. It's more for information. I was not aware of the actual process itself.
Oh yes, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
Any more comments? Okay, can we deal with that item as finished then? There's a recommendation. We have commented on the plan and we are asked to approve the proposed draft internal audit plan for 2021-22. Are we happy with that?
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, how are we going to include a SIL review as well?
I think it was implied. Can we make sure we do that?
Thank you.
Graham, can we do that for a future meeting when it's convenient?
So, Chairman, are you asking if it should go into Gail's audit plan or whether it goes on to this committee's work programme? Sorry, I'm just checking in on what you meant.
Well, where's the best place to review that?
Well, so what I'd suggest is that, Gail, have you got it in your work programme to look at SIL?
It wasn't in for this year, but it can be. Yeah. That I have got resources available that can be looked at. We have just done SIL income in this financial year.
I mean, I think, Chairman, this is where I think we've got to also look at the ONS work programmes. And Councillor Gray mentioned just now the business transformation. And business transformation is on the Value for Money ONS's work programme as a regular item, and they look at that, aspects of that. And I believe SIL is too, or it's either on theirs or the environment ONS's. So I think we would need to be careful not to duplicate or an overlap. I think if you were looking at specifically the governance aspects, that would probably be okay. But I think we'd need to coordinate through Kimberly's team to make sure that the committee, the ONS committee and the audit committee were looking at perhaps different aspects of it, or that either committee was satisfied that the other one was covering everything.
Okay.
What I was proposing, Chairman, was it goes on the audit plan, and it shouldn't conflict with ONS. We're talking about having an audit of the process to make sure that they're complying and everything else. I mean, it's a big sum of money going through.
That absolutely fine. So I think probably the best thing is then I'll talk to Gail offline and we'll sort of scope that and try and get something into the audit plan, because I think the best way of doing that is to do it as an internal audit, and then the committee can review that if that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you then. Let's move on to item 10, which is progress on the implementation of the internal audit agreed actions. This is Gail again, I guess.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Audit Committee may recognise a few of these recommendations. I do apologise. And you will find there are a few on here that have already been implemented. So if you wish, I'll go through and inform you of the ones that have been implemented already. And that includes any of the recommendations relating to Hugh Wagstaff have been implemented. And there is also a request from Zach Elwood, Head of Planning and Economic Development. As I mentioned earlier, the Horizon system implementation has been delayed, and therefore he has requested that he has an extension to the 31st of May to enable all the training and staff to be familiar for what they're actually doing. Sorry, I'm running out of light here. Yes, testing. It was testing, robust testing and training. There are a few recommendations outstanding in relation to BACS. I've spoken to the financial services manager who deals with systems, who's conveyed to me that there have been some changes regarding the structure. So regarding the policies and procedures, they've had to revise those. Although they had already been agreed, they now have to be adapted to include those changes regarding the controls that have been put in place.
Do we have any major outstanding actions still to?
No, I wouldn't say there's any major ones. The majority of the recommendations evolve around the planning income.
Where do you think, coming back to the comment I made at the beginning about the action log, all these actions here, the internal audit actions, relate to, if you like, the matters arising, the general work plan agenda items, the ones that we deal with as a matter of course. The action log were things which came up almost outside that the work plan, like the habitats reports and so on. Do you want to include those action logs in this section? Is that a convenient place to include them all, rather than have them as a separate item?
I think it would be best actually being a separate item, because this particular report is actually generated from our Pintana system, which is a system used for monitoring outstanding recommendations.
Yeah.
So any reports that are produced and that the actions aren't actioned within the timescale, that's when I then have to generate this report. So I think that maybe could be.
You keep it as it is. I didn't want to just wonder.
Yeah. There's a risk of them getting lost within the Pintana system because they don't all the other items you're talking about are not relevant to Pintana.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions for Gail on this? Councillor Seaborn.
Thanks, Chairman. One question on the planning system stuff. Software implementations, particularly when they're bespoke implementations, are notoriously brittle. So these items have been around for a while now. Are we comfortable that Zach's asked for enough time to complete this, or is this just a deferment? Because the last thing I'd like to see is this reappearing with another request for a deferment to our next meeting. I'd much rather any deferment is based on a confidence of delivery. We can fully understand the reason for it being where it is, but like I say, I really wouldn't want to see it again, appearing again, just drifting on. So that's one point. And on the various items in Peter's area of responsibility, there's not an awful lot of detail about what's happening to them. And I can fully understand things being deferred because of COVID. That's absolutely understood. But it would actually be nice to get these papers that say that, rather than we see status red and no notes and no clear idea of where it's going. I mean, either we have a system and we use it, or we don't. But we don't appear to be using the system here. So, two comments: lack of information around the finance team action items. Where are they going? When will they be dealt with? And has Zach got enough time to actually deal with the Horizon related issues properly? Thank you.
How do we take them on board, Graham?
Sorry, Chairman, didn't catch that.
So how do we take that on board? Do you need to talk to Zach again about his commitment?
Yes, I'll talk to Zach again. I mean, and thank you, Councillor Seaborn, because you're right. We don't want this back in the next committee, and he's constantly on a roll. I think we have got to the point now where we need to go live in March, and we are on track for that. And this isn't a conventional systems implementation, as Gail said. In fact, in the planning system world, there are only a few sort of big sort of legacy type systems floating around. Ours isn't great at all. We've had it for a long time. It's sort of end of life. And so a couple of years ago, we started doing this work with StatMap on this system called Horizon, and we are almost there now. And the planning team are really excited about it because it will transform a lot of the back office. It's not the front facing. So the problems we had recently with the planning system speed that the customers see through the portal isn't what we're talking about. That's our Civica front end. This actually is the mechanics in the back office of the workflow, and it will generate a lot of the reports, etc. So we're almost there, and it wasn't by any means a sort of a cost-cutting measure. It was actually a way of getting something that was bespoke as far as is possible. And I mean, obviously the company will go on and hopefully market it, and will be a reference site and all of that. I think on the I think Zach is confident with the times that he's put down and given to Gail. So I will have a chat with him, but I think we'll probably stand by them, and it'll just with another committee looming in a few months, it will focus Zach's mind on making sure that we follow those through. So, but I do appreciate the sort of question there, Councillor Seaborn. I think it's we'll do all we can, but I will have a chat with him offline and see whether he wants to have another look at that with Gail. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I'm not quite sure which order, but Councillor Gray, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I like Councillor Seaborn. I was going to raise the issue with Zach, because we've had Zach to this committee before on missing dates. But picking up on Peter Vickers' comments, they are behind, and I'm not noticing a reschedule or a rescheduled date in there. Have I missed it? I mean, it should have been completed by the 31st of October or the 30th of October, but I don't see that we're deferring those. Could you just comment on that?
Chairman, Peter, I'll comment on that. I wasn't expecting them to be going on beyond this date, hence why I haven't asked for deferment. So I'm satisfied with Walter's explanation to Gail. I have every confidence that he'll get it sorted PDQ. So whilst technically we're over date on that, I don't see this as an ongoing issue. It's not a difficult thing to sort out.
Sorry, could you just explain what that means? You don't need an extension because they will be completed tomorrow, or?
Well, if you want to literally stick to the rules, an extension would be useful. An extension at the end of the week, please, and I'll get it resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davison.
I'm following on both from Councillor Seaborn and Gray. I think it would be very helpful if dates are put in which are realistic. And I think it would be also very useful to have them clearly identified in the document. There's nothing wrong in having an extension for perfectly understandable reasons. For example, the redirection of staff and activities because of COVID or systems coming in late. But I think, we need to have a focus on a particular completion date, just so that they will be completed. And so that we can then tick them off and drop them off from the report. Can would it be at all possible, Gail, when there is an extension requested and agreed, that we actually put that in as a revised due date? Cancel out the original due date and put in the revised due date, so it makes it clear as to when we as a committee expect to see green finished off.
Yes. Again, if and when it has reached the due date and then been implemented, obviously it doesn't get reported on this report again once it's been completed. But yeah.
Okay, Jerome.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Floyd Douglas.
Hello there. Well, I've had 3 of my 4 points taken away, so that's good. Nice to see that we're all on the same page here. This would be fast. I suppose from a project management point of view, I find just a tiny bit concerning that if you look at the planning procedure notes, which are both read on page 70 and 71 of the pack, this was originally, the exit meeting was originally the 16th of June last year, which means that the problem was identified way before that, and the first exit date was probably anticipated before that. I just wondered why in that circumstance, when you've got this already 9 months out to where we are, never mind about the due date of the 28th of February, is why is it still a red? Because for me, coming from my background in banking, a red meant like action within 28 days or 14 days. It didn't mean, well, give it another couple of months, we'll sort it. I'm being flippant here, probably because I'm getting a bit tired. But I just thought if it's not red, let's not have it red. If it is red, then we really have to start asking the questions about, has it been classified right? Or do we actually really have a problem with delivery here that we should be aware of?
It's a good point, and it's maybe something I'll take on board, and I'll look to see whether engaging with the head of service and reassessing as to whether we do agree, whether it still remains a red or whether it has, in effect, moved down the priority. Yeah. But obviously, this particular report is actually reporting what it was assessed at the time when the audit was completed by myself or the auditors.
Yeah, understood. So that would be helpful, because it means it doesn't start, hairs running when you look at little blobs of red, which actually are not really red at all.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments? Okay, consider that item complete. We have a recommendation to consider the information which you have done and identify any action that we wish to be taken, and we have done that. Are we all happy with this?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right, moving on to item 11, which is review of the progress on the achievement of the 2020-21 audit plan. Again, Gail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you will see in front of you in item number 11, the main body of the report gives an indication that a lot of progress has been made on the audit plan. We're not 100% there yet. There's about 30% still outstanding. I'm going to say it's 30% still outstanding. All reviews have been started. It's just the finishing, getting over the finishing line with reviews. And a couple of those reviews are actually relate to my own reviews. And all I can say is we are working very hard to catch up on the slow start we had to the year. And I don't think there's really anything that I've wanted to point out, apart from the fact that there is on page 90, decant and demolition and payroll are now at final stage. And decant is on covalent and payroll is about to go on tomorrow morning. So good progress has been made by the auditor, or the auditors, including myself, in actually progressing to achieve the plan. And I must admit, it has been at times been quite difficult, because obviously people have been, shall we say, displaced, not generally always dealing with their normal workflows or work that they're employed to carry out. So sometimes it's been difficult to get hold of people, but I think we're getting there, and hopefully we will achieve the plan we set out. In paragraph 7, I'll just point out to the audit committee the adjustments that were made to the plan. There was 52 days of plan was deferred, but we had 54 days added in. And one of those that was added in was the Execom income collection via Aggresso, which has meant collaboration between finance and planning to resolve any issues that were identified in that review.
Okay. Councillor Cole. Are you muted?
Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. I think Gail must just refer to that at the end then. But so this programme of internal audit, this was set before the COVID-19 shutdown, or did we take that on board when this programme was first set up a year ago, a bit more than a year ago?
It was before. I'll just double check on the date. I can't. The date's actually at the top of the paper as to when it went. Oh no, I think I've just put March. It was March when we actually set the audit plan. I think it was.
So probably didn't take on board
COVID
yeah. At that point. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's been, in the end, you mentioned there's still a few things to finish, but there's not been a gross effect on the elements of the plan which couldn't be a gross effect as a result of the COVID-19 lockdowns.
What I can say is the number of the reviews that we've carried out this year have been less than we carried out in previous years.
Okay.
Because I always have audit days reserved, and those audit days reserved I have not used. Because I like this year when I've set the plan, I always have some days, some audit days that I hold back in case we have occurrences that we need to use them, or like any suggested reviews that the audit committee may come up with, which of course I've had maybe possibly 1 or 2 added tonight. And that would use those days. But this year there hasn't been. Usually we give the audit number of days is about 240 days. And as you can see at the bottom of my report, I have 190 days. So there is, in effect, a shortfall of 50 days that haven't been spent, in effect. But any underspend that we would have, obviously, that underspend in my budget would then be put back into the kitty regarding any financial savings for this year.
But does that mean there were some things that you just were impossible to audit because of the COVID-19 situation?
Well, everything that we put into the plan that we presented to the audit committee, we were able to achieve the number of days I presented to the audit committee. Bearing in mind, there's a couple of days here and there, because obviously there was 50 days taken out and we added in 54. So everything that we actually agreed upon at the start of last year, we have delivered those number of days. But what we haven't done is actually used the reserves, in effect, that I hold on to spend throughout the year. Having to take on board the fact of the effect of COVID, but obviously, and also the availability of staff to enable us to fulfill any further review days, it wasn't deemed possible to actually use 50 further days within the time period that we had available due to the late start we had in the first quarter.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. There were a couple of items where I was going to ask for some more detail. These being first and second quarter reviews where the opinion was limited. Gail's just told us that the decant and demolition process has now reached final stage, and that's really good news, because we're still knocking down houses and putting up new ones, and that's obviously going to have a direct impact on our residents, so that's good to hear. The other item in that situation is the review of procurement levels with suppliers. Is completion of that imminent? Because again, it's a control process, I guess, and with the dire state of our finances, courtesy of COVID, any control process that has clearly got some issues because of the limited opinion needs to be tidied up sooner rather than later.
Yes, the procurement officer is in actual fact dealing with those. One of the outcomes of that particular review related to the procurement strategy. And at the moment, the government are actually they have developed a government strategy, and our strategy then needs to emulate some of those the areas within our own strategy that's replicated in the government strategy. There was also some other procedural side of things that needed to be put in place, and also some more monitoring and reporting of the activity that occurs within our procurement.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah. Just as long as they're going to be tidied up quickly, that's good news.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes,
Thank you.
Patrick's dealing with those. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I'm just picking up, Gail, your audit on the positions with sole responsibility for service function. This was something that was sponsored by the audit committee and goes back, I think, to the air quality problem of some time. Is that going to be completed soon?
Hopefully, Councillor Gray, it's one that I'm doing myself.
Yep.
As you can imagine, it is taking, I think I actually sent out the main email round about the beginning of the financial start of this year due to other things that I was working on. So a lot of staff have actually fed into that process. But I must admit, I still need to get back to that to collate all that together before I decide on how I move that forward onto its next stage. But I have got that in hand.
What is the next stage? The draft report?
No, the next stage will be actually looking at collating all the information I've received, and then actually doing some random checks within some of the services that may or may not have responded to me to ensure that I've picked up all the areas that I am aware of where there may actually be sole responsibility for a function.
I can't emphasize, I think that is something that's quite important for us. I mean, as I said, it goes back to what the audit committee discussed quite some time ago. So if we could keep an eye on that and perhaps let us know when it's completed.
I think with the incident that we've had with air quality, I think, well, I know that heads of service and managers are well aware of ensuring that the scope for there being people with sole responsibility is very much more limited. There's much more higher managerial overview of what is what people are actually doing and who does what.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wonder, Gail, looking at the table, you've got the two right-hand columns. One is the assurance opinion, and then you've got a space for comment. Could those two columns be combined? I mean, when you say something that is reasonable, that's sort of adequate, but still needing something to complete. Is that worth making a comment on? You know, rather than say reasonable, say what it exactly is. It gives more information about where we stand.
But that is, oh, sorry, wait a minute. I've gone down a page. I don't. No, sorry. I was just checking on the actual audit reports. Within the audit reports, if it gives a reasonable, it actually gives the definition of what reasonable is.
Okay.
So what I can do, if you wish, I can actually include that class, that designation when it has reasonable, I could put the definition of what reasonable means, if that assists you.
Yeah, it's just, so that when
No
we
problem.
we know what that means.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, your hand is still up, or you've got a new comment?
I've lowered my hand.
Thank you. Any other comment? No. Okay. Well, in that case, we close this item. There's a recommendation that we note the contents of the internal audit progress report. Noted. Agreed.
Noted. Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 12, which is the fraud investigation summary on page 95 to 100. Is it you again, Gail?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'll have this one. Yes, this is the summary of the work that's been completed by the fraud investigator. And as I say, the report conveys the activity on Annex 1, I think actually is most important, where it gives the information of the workflow that has been completed, but more important, the successes regarding obtaining 5 properties back into housing stock to enable those to be given to people who would use them the way we would wish them to be using them. The comparators at the bottom, which I know the audit committee are usually interested in. Although we have been in COVID and the fraud investigator has been helping out regarding some of the verification work at the start of this financial year, he has been very busy on dealing with cases that have been referred to him relating to right to buys and also people not using the property the way they should do. And as you can see, we are in Q3, so we're marginally, at the moment, we're marginally below 300,000, below what the outturn for the whole of last year. But we know that since the beginning of January, there has been quite a lot of activity, and the successes that's come in since then will be reported to you in the June audit committee.
Now, it looks quite good, isn't it? If you look at, I mean, that first line on that bottom block, the total to the 30th of September. I mean, that's halfway through the year, so you're only halfway through yet. So that's, you know.
That should, can I just reiterate, that should be December. We've only got one, sorry, we only have 1 quarter. Sorry, the top of the report does say to the 31st of December. I have missed that bit down the bottom. Okay. I do apologise.
Right, no, but it's on a par with the previous years, really, more or less.
Yeah. I think in consideration of the work and the limitations that's been placed on us this year due to COVID. No, anytime there has been any visits done, obviously he's not been going into the property. He's had his PPE and standing outside the property with his mask, etc. As and when, and those have only been done in cases where there has been a desperate need to do them. Yeah. Whereas obviously there's been other cases where we have had to deal with things we have been doing with everyone else, and that's remotely. So it does place quite a restriction on the activity that can happen.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Cole.
Make sure I'm off mute. Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I fear I may have asked this question before the last time, perhaps. This doesn't cover fraud to do with the COVID-19 business support grant. Is that correct?
That's correct. It doesn't include any to do with COVID grant. If we would probably, my plan would be anything that is identified as being fraudulent due to COVID grant, I would be putting that on a separate report and reporting that separately.
And you haven't so far?
So far, I have nothing recorded yet.
Really?
Yeah.
But you are looking. I mean, or the council is looking at this.
Well,
it's our job to do this, or is it
It
not?
is our job to do this, and as I'd mentioned earlier on my audit plan, we're going to be participating in the NFI national exercise regarding COVID-19. But even before we awarded any grants regarding COVID-19, we also used the facilities of the National Fraud Investigation to upload and double check that the details that we had regarding those receiving the grants were as accurate as possible regarding shared and data matched with other third parties regarding bank accounts, etc. To A, their valid bank account, B, the bank account hadn't been used fraudulently by in any other authority, etc. before we processed the grants for payment. So we've done quite a lot to limit the risk of us making payments to people that are not applicable to receive those grants.
Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Sharon.
Any other questions? No. Well, thank you, Gail. Very comprehensive report as usual. We have a recommendation that we note the success of the fraud investigation activity. Noted?
Noted.
Noted.
Agreed. Yeah.
Noted.
Yeah. Okay, item 13, the recurrent annual work programme. The last page of our agenda. You're going to cover the scale?
I can, Chairman. Yes, this is the audit plan. The audit committee's annual work programme.
Yeah.
And taken on board regarding the deadlines for the audit committee for the accounts. I don't know whether they're going to be changing. Maybe Peter might be able to add something in on those as to whether the programme is going to remain the same. But I don't think there's anything else. As John Roberts mentioned, external audit annual audit letter. I noticed that's in for September 2021. I think he said that's not going to be presented to the audit committee anymore. So that may have to change.
That will be removed, yeah.
Yeah, that'll have to be removed. And I can't see anything else unless Peter or Graham wants to add anything.
Chairman, we need to be looking at the corporate risk register. That needs to come onto the work programme. What I'm suggesting is that at the moment we are refreshing, well, we're actually rebuilding the register based on the new corporate plan which was recently adopted. And we're working through the heads of service at the moment to compile the new register. So at some point, the committee really ought to be having a probably an informal session to start with, and a couple of hours maybe to go through what's there and have a good look at that register and satisfy yourselves as to what's on there, the processes are correct, and then we can cover it off at the next audit meeting.
We should do that before the September meeting. We've got a risk management.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, probably in the next month would be more appropriate.
Okay. Can I leave that with you, Gail, or whoever to schedule that in?
Oh,
that would be Kimberly.
Kimberly, well, sorry, wherever she's gone. Anyway, yes, okay. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Just two questions. Sorry. Going back to the point that Peter just raised, can we, looking at the risk register, look at the insurance reserves? That was a subject that came up. I know you probably got to go back to the value for money, but I'd be very interested in that as well, if we're looking at the risk register. Are we leading ourselves to the problem? I mean, it appears that this July decision there to look at the accounts, are we going to achieve that? Or are we actually know now that we may have to slip this by a month Perhaps officers could comment on that. It's scheduling it that worries me, because if we're going to slip it into August, then we've got our meeting in September. I see Graham's ready to respond, so I'll stop at that. That's my...
But Chairman, as John Roberts said earlier, the government are consulting on the new dates, but it was interesting to hear John seemed to think we'll be working to the same deadlines as last year. So actually, I don't think the accounts, whilst we'll have the accounts ready to publish and submit for audit, as Rosie said earlier, in June, July, when it comes to the committee with the auditor's audit findings report, I think it's going to be October. I think the September meeting will need to jump forward to October as it did last year. I suspect the government will go back to having July as the deadline for the council to submit its accounts for audit, and the end of October again for the auditors to audit. But so, I mean, maybe at this point we could just bounce the accounts into the September one, and we should hear soon from the government about their deadlines. But I was just noting what John said about how realistic it is for the auditors to have completed their work by the autumn. So I'd suggest we move the annual government statement and statement of accounts down into September, because we consider those together. And that's probably, what does that say? Certification report. I don't know what that, oh yeah, no, that's okay, that can stay there. Yeah, so I think the accounts and annual government statement, let's move to September. And it might be that September has to move to November when we get the government's new deadlines.
Okay, thank you.
But Councillor Gray, you're absolutely right. Let's do it now, because it won't be in July. I don't think there's, and that will be just based on what John said about the audit. I don't think there's any way they'll meet that deadline this year.
Okay.
Chairman, in respect of the insurance reserve, the VFM committee will be undertaking a piece of work. It's on their agenda to look at all the earmark reserves, particularly around the risk-based reserves. So that's the business rates reserve and the insurance reserve. It might be more expedient to actually join in that piece of work as it happens in whatever form you can on an ONS committee. Otherwise, from an insurance perspective, the audit committee, I suppose within your remit here, it's more looking at the ensuring that there's appropriate process in place to cover off adequate insurance coverage, which the reserve itself is there to do that, but it's not necessarily the governance side of insurance. But it's still valid if you have an interest to. What I'm saying really is, if you have an interest in the detail of the insurance reserve, then it'd probably be better to join the piece of work that's happening on the ONS side.
Sorry, if I could come back, Chairman. I mean, we've done this before, Peter. This is part of the drift and the overlap between audit and ONS. I mean, I do think that looking at the risk register and insurance, and we have actually gone through the insurance figures going back 2 years in terms of having a look at it. And I do think it's part of the assessing the risk, and part of the risk mitigation in some respects is the insurance.
I'm not averse to you looking at these things. You know, you're very welcome to. I mean, pointing out that this piece of work is happening somewhere else. So if you're sticking to your terms of reference, then there is that demarcation between the two.
Is that something we can consider at the risk review meeting we shall be holding? Is that an item we can take at that point?
Yes, sure. It's something we can look at in detail as part of that. It's very straightforward today.
Okay. Are you okay, Councillor Gray? Is that?
Yeah. Well, perhaps one or two of the ONS VFM people would like to join our risk meeting and learn something about what we do on risk. Perhaps educate them.
Okay, Councillor Cole. Muted.
Sorry, I think that was it. That hand should be down. Sorry, Chairman.
Any other comments? No, in that case, complete this item. Recommendation, we are invited to note the recurrent work programme. That's noted.
Noted.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Noted.
I think there are no other items we need to consider. No exempt session. So in that case, I think I can declare this meeting closed.